Welcome to the 52nd T.B. Davie Memorial Lecture on Academic Freedom. The Academic Freedom Committee is very proud to be co-hosting this lecture with the Office of the Vice-Chancellor. We are also pleased to see that the T.B. Davie Memorial Lecture continues to be of great interest, especially to our students. I will pause for now and call upon Vice-Chancellor Professor Mamkheti Phakeng to give you an official welcome and share some introductory remarks.
I'm standing because I was told that people hear me better when I'm standing. So. Professor Pumla Dineo Gqola, Professor Lelwani Ramugondo, Chair of the Academic Freedom Committee, and her fellow members in the audience, students, colleagues from within UCT and other institutions around the Western Cape and perhaps around the country, welcome, namkelekile nonke. Welcome to the 52nd T.B. Davie Memorial Lecture. Whether you're part of this university on a daily basis or not, I hope each of you feels at home tonight. This is an auspicious moment, and I hope you will celebrate it with us. This evening, the podium here at UCT is occupied by 3 Black African, South African full professors. Imagine. I bet the founders of UCT must be rolling in their graves right now. Moreover, we, 3 women, were born in the late 60s and early 70s. So when the student uprisings took place in Soweto in 1976, we were in primary school. And when South Africa became a democracy in 1994, we were in our 20s, mid-20s or early 20s. Not much older than many of our students today. The obstacles we faced throughout our lives and education were significant. As much as we should celebrate what is on stage today, we should also acknowledge that while the 3 of us are an example of what is possible, we are also very much a rare success story in this country. A success story that became possible in part because of academic freedom, the voices that spoke up against discrimination, apartheid, inequality, opened the doors of learning and opportunity for us. We often speak about academic freedom at UCT, but it is not always explained. We don't engage on what it means and how much we can exercise it, whether there are limits or not. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I want to highlight Professor T.B. Davie, Professor Davie's T.B. Davie's definition, who served as a Vice-Chancellor of UCT from 1948 to 1955, and he defined academic freedom as the university's right to determine who shall be taught, who shall teach, what shall be taught, and how it should be taught without regard to any criterion except academic merit. T.B. Davie coined this definition back in 1950, and at that time, it was a statement of activism because the apartheid government was then instituting laws to segregate higher education institutions by race. Professor Davie died in 1955. 4 years later, when the extension of the University Education Bill became law, UCT established this annual lecture named in honor of Professor Davie. Over decades, the Academic Freedom Committee has hosted speakers such as Helen Joseph, Walter Sisulu, Noam Chomsky, Kara Asmal, Ferel Hafeji, and Max Dupree. And last year, Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, who met with such resistance for his ideas at UCT 20 years ago, came back to give this lecture. And this year, he rejoined UCT in our Center for African Studies as an honorary professor. The timing of tonight's lecture also resonates with other historical events. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the Marikana massacre of 2012. Yesterday, UCT hosted a gathering to reflect on the 50th anniversary of UCT's council's humiliating capitulation to the apartheid government in 1968 when it withdrew UCT's offer of employment to senior lecturer Achimafeje for no other reason than his race. Such painful memories join with more recent tragedies, the Isidimeni scandal, the children who are raped and murdered, the hardships that confront so many of us each day. They show us how far we have come and how much further we must still go as a nation. Our voices must be raised on behalf of those who cannot speak out for themselves. We need to also critique ourselves, admit our errors as an institution, our misjudgments, and our unresponsiveness at times. One of the reasons we on the podium have come this far, as women and as Black African South Africans in the untransformed academic sector, is because of the voices that were raised on our behalf by our parents and grandparents and by leaders of the struggle. Apartheid failed, and opportunities opened for us because of those voices. The power of academic freedom is that it welcomes the need for dissent and change. It honors different points of view and ways of thinking. This is a space we need to continue to cultivate here at UCT and all other institutions of learning, not just once a year at the T.B. Davie Memorial Lecture. If we are going to use this space honestly, then we must also use it to examine and critique ourselves. For instance, we need to admit that the UCT professorate has not transformed. I'm not telling you something that you don't already know. The conversation around the transformation of the professorate needs to be constructive, however. It needs to involve the different voices that make up this university. It's time to reclaim UCT as a space of ideas. My view is that we're losing that space of ideas in the last few years. We need to reclaim this space as a space of activism, not only when we disagree with an unjust government, and not just by carrying placards, because that's not the only way of activism. But we also need to be informed, responsible citizens who hold our leaders and ourselves accountable. Academic freedom must be the norm at UCT. Let me congratulate the members of the Academic Freedom Committee for their commitment to this valuable support of academic freedom. And thank you to Professor Ramugondo, who serves as chair, and fellow committee members for opening this UCT platform to a different voice today in Professor Pumla Dineo Gqola. As Vice-Chancellor, my commitment to academic freedom at UCT will be at the center of my work because I'm concerned about opening the space for ideas and being comfortable with dissent, that we're not a church. We should be able to sit and listen to different ways of arguing and different kinds of arguments that we don't necessarily agree with. I will exercise this freedom responsibly, and I call on all of us in the UCT community to protect and exercise this freedom in a constructive and responsible manner. Our efforts together will ensure that we become stronger individuals, a better institution, and a better society. Thank you, and welcome to this year's T.B. Davie Lecture.
So I'll emulate my leader and take the podium as well. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. It was good that you made the link between the lecture and what happens in our society, so that we know that this lecture is not divorced from what happens in society, that it's not divorced from the tragic loss we have suffered recently with the passing away of Professor Mayosi, a loss that reminded us of the tragic losses of some of our brightest students through suicide over the years. This lecture is not divorced from the fact that as we mourn the passing away of Mama Zondeni Veronica Sobukwe, many of us regret the fact that we never got to meet her in person so that we could learn more from her. Colleagues, friends, and scholars across generations, I hope you will agree with me that in the context we find ourselves, there can be not more an apt speaker for the T.B. Davie Lecture for 2018 than Professor Pumla Gqola. Prof. Gqola is Dean of Research at the University of Fort Hare and was formerly Professor in African Literary and Gender Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. Before that, she was senior lecturer at the University of the Free State. I'm proud to say that Prof. Gqola is an alumnus of the University of Cape Town, holding a master's degree from UCT in English Literary Studies with a thesis that focused on masculinities and femininities in Black consciousness literature. This is before Black radical feminism became fashionable. Now, at the 2017 T.B. Davie lecture, I posed a few questions to Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, our speaker at the time, before he took the podium. One of the questions I asked was, in the context of decoloniality, what do we make of post-colonial scholars? For those who attended the lecture, you will recall that I did not get an answer to this question. But we cannot blame Prof. Mamdani for that. He had a lot on his plate, given many questions that needed answers that evening. I bring that question back today, given that our 2018 speaker for the T.B. Davie Memorial Lecture, Professor Pumla Gqola, is unapologetically a post-colonial scholar. Prof. Gqola's second master's, with a focus on Caribbean and Black British literature from the University of Warwick in Britain, was taken within colonial and post-colonial literatures, and her Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Munich in Germany was in post-colonial studies. I hope today, as we are still grappling with the prospects and challenges of decolonization and decoloniality, that my question will be answered. Even as I accept that this conversation may still have a long trajectory ahead. Prof. Gqola is not afraid of conversation, no matter how difficult the topic. She has engaged and written about those things that most people often shy away from. Her books are testament to this. What is Slavery to Me? Post-colonial slave memory in post-apartheid South Africa, and Rape, a South African nightmare. For the latter, she won the highly coveted 2016 Alan Paton Award. It is significant to mention that Prof. Gqola's master's thesis on masculinities and femininities in Black consciousness literature was published in Staff Rider magazine. Staff Rider, some of you will recall, was a South African literary and arts magazine published by Raven Press from 1978 to 1993. It took its name and identity from township slang, referring to Black youth who traveled either sitting on the roof or hanging onto the outside of overcrowded, racially segregated commuter trains. Some of us lost friends we knew through that practice. This publication was produced in paperback to keep costs low in order to make it accessible to as many readers as possible. More importantly, it offered a forum to challenge racial and cultural oppression. I do not think that I would be wrong to surmise that from then on, the young scholar then, Pumla Dineo Gqola, had caught the bug that continued to afflict her today, that of being a public intellectual alongside being a global scholar. In addition to the 2 books I've already mentioned and other numerous peer-reviewed journal articles, Prof. Gqola has also released 2 other books that go beyond the contextual study of a phenomenon within a fairly academic structure. These are Reflecting Rogue, Inside the Mind of a Feminist, and A Renegade Called Simpiwe. I had the privilege of reviewing the latter for Gender, a journal of culture and African women's studies. I found in that book, as I've done in many of her books, an author with an intense appreciation for textual aesthetics. My personal favorite line in this regard in A Renegade Called Simpiwe is where Gqola writes about her choice about what parts of Simpiwe Dana's lyrics she translates and the manner in which the same lyrics are translated differently in various parts of the book, and explains, and I quote, "Not because I'm trying to fight the inevitable loss that haunts all translation," close quote. Another favorite line is, and again I quote, "Renegade behavior is policed, commented on, belittled, and deliberately misunderstood," close quote. I had these lines rush back at me when Prof. Gqola sent us her title for the paper for today, Between Academic Inheritance and the Agency of Definitions. I found myself wondering about renegade behavior in the context of academic inheritance and the inevitable loss that haunts all translation as we rush towards definitions of the moment. Please help me welcome Prof. Gqola to the podium.
Thank you very much for that incredibly generous introduction, Professor Ramugondo and Professor Phakeng. You know what I almost said. Good evening. I'm not sure that you're going to get the answer about what to do with post-colonial scholars in the era of decolonization. Because I'm not sure which is the era of decolonization. There have been so many. I guess the simple answer is do what you will with post-colonial scholars. Good evening. I'm honored to be invited to give this year's TB Davie lecture. Thank you to the Academic Freedom Committee, its chair, Professor Elelwani Ramugondo, the VC, Professor Mamukgeti Phakeng, and all the people who worked really hard to make sure that I could get here with the behind-the-scenes work. I am not sure whether to respond or not to two small inaccuracies in my biographies. In 1976, as exceptional as Professor Phakeng would like to think I was 3 and not yet. And not yet in primary school. But now I'm starting to think perhaps if I were truly exceptional, I would have been. The second is, much as I would have loved to have my UCT MA be published in Stuff Rider, Stuff Rider no longer existed it was in fact a study of masculinities and femininities in Black consciousness writing published in Stuff Rider. So it was a study of Stuff Rider rather than although now you've given me a new regret. Thank you very much, Professor Ramugondo. I suppose even a regret, very few things, I say often, very few things are lost on a writer, and very few things are lost on a nerd, which I think many of us who choose the life of the mind are. As a professor and as a UCT graduate 3 times over, I am especially appreciative of the legacy of this lecture, which stands as testimony to the kinds of principles and values we want to uphold in the academy, to independence from political and market interference, to the commitment to the value of intellectual and scholarly work at a time when we very often are invited or bullied into being apologetic for valuing and choosing intellectual and scholarly work. Pride of place for rigor, contestation as crucial. When Professor T.B. Davie insisted on a university's independence to make decisions about what to teach, who to teach, and how to teach based on the rigor and merit of those categories, he was saying something about what a university ought to be. This is a vision of something, an ideal to defend, and to do so in the midst of onslaught. In 2018, we pretend that all UCT communities agreed with him. We do not say so. When we speak of Professor T.B. Davie, we simply omit the contestation within UCT about the values that its leaders stood for so unapologetically. The fact of history is an inconvenient truth. T.B. Davie's stance was under very difficult times. It was inconvenient, but he held fast, even as all around him there were others at universities elsewhere who argued differently, who were not as affronted by apartheid's attempts to stifle freedom of intellectual work. Those within the intelligentsia, the professorate, who upheld the Nationalist Party notions of a useful university, useful to the apartheid machinery, state and status quo. Useful, in other words, to suppression, to white supremacy, to intersecting forms of exclusion and oppression. The roots of this lecture link clearly the connection between what a university is for and what we would like it to be, and justice. These freedoms are not separate. His was not only an ideal, as important as ideals are. It was also a response and rejection of prevailing notions of value, of truth, of power. When we think about academic freedom as a dynamic, positive force, as we must, we do so looking to a past whose inheritance is clarity about the kinds of spaces that are worthy of defending when we speak about universities. The past is one, this room is freezing, is that deliberate? I don't remember UCT venues being this cold, but then it's been a long time since I left, so I may be misremembering. This past is one that highlights the importance of what we need to retain, protect, defend the academy from, as much as it is more to a vision of what a university can be and what it should be for. The freedom of the academy is both for its own sake and indivisible from other liberties. Now, whereas for many of us in the academy, what a university is for remains quite clear. The value and values of a university are under constant contestation. None of us would have missed the relentless invitation to turn universities into glorified training schools, vocational schools. We have all had to respond to and navigate expectations that we are here to train students who will respond to what the market requires, demands, or that we are to reshape ourselves in direct response to the will of funders and investors. This insistence on being useful for markets is not unique. Although some of the faces of such expectations mutate somewhat in our day, at the same time, we also occupy universities that contain within them the disciplines and schools that really do not make much sense given what a university is for. And I'm not always certain that the decisions here or in other academies across the world to incorporate some teaching that merely trains students to fill existing gaps in the employment market is not in conflict with these loved ideas of what universities are for. To think about academic freedom from the South African Academy and to think about academic freedom globally is to also be mindful of a confluence of governmental threats to academic freedom, to the academy, the trivialization of freedom to question, to investigate, to contest, threats that Bibi Bakara Yusuf insists numb the imagination. Academic freedom is always haunted by this invitation to generate complexity in the midst of pressure to conform. I was struck recently by the rage expressed by members of a South African university, academic, administrative, and student, an analysis offered by their Vice-Chancellor in a media report. He was quoted as speaking frankly and forthrightly about some of the surmountable challenges at the university he heads. These were met with ire, not because they were intellectually misdirected or invalid or baseless or even just plain wrong, all categories which seemed besides the point, to my shock, but because he had spoken out of turn. The charge was that as the university's chief accounting officer, he ought not to have spoken as he did. Upon countering this with references to academic freedom, I was very quickly reminded that this was secondary. Academic freedom was secondary to the university's business interests and public face. Wish as we might, the defense of academic freedom is not something that enjoys universal support as a principle across the academy. It is possible for many to be concerned with academic freedom only insofar as they are personally and individually protected from incursions against their work. There is much literature on incursions from government and to a lesser extent markets on academic freedom. Such work helps us with the difficult thinking of how we respond to different manifestations of power within and beyond the university. In our tussles here, we are clear on the entanglement of academic freedom with issues of power, how we respond to power. We are aware, like T.B. Davie and his peers, of the importance of responding to power in very clear ways, strategies which always carry some degree of risk. Unlike many people outside the academy who often use academic synonymously with that which does not matter in any substantial way, as in the oft-heard phrase, oh, that is academic. We understand how indispensable the epistemic project is. As vigilant as we sometimes can be against external threats and challenges to academic freedom, the gaze is often averted from a critical interrogation of performances of power within the academy. But academic freedom has to be about how we respond to power variously located, attentive to the consequences of contestations, even by those we do not understand or necessarily sympathize with, and reflective of how we translate our ideas into arguments. Most importantly, academic freedom, when claimed as a right, insists on contestation free from persecution. To pretend that matters of academic freedom emerge exclusively from sources outside the academy, the threats to matters of academic freedom emerge exclusively from outside the academy, requires that we look away from pressure on scholars to self-censor and reevaluate, pressure on scholars to self-censor, and the re-evaluation and redefinition of academic freedom that is taking place within higher education itself, locally and globally. Faced with problematic performances of power within the academy, what value attaches to ignoring invitations to intellectual engagement, to think through what the freedom in academic freedom refers to? In the aftermath, and interestingly, the very sight of Rhodes Must Fall and the Fees Must Fall it made possible nationally and beyond, universities have to deal with discomfort made possible by a new generation of students. Student movements, marketization, corporatization of universities, and the growth of managerialism within universities all at the same time. All these irritate academic freedom pressure points in painful and productive ways. Careful engagement with all of them and with each, recognizing that they work to very different ends, some closing, some opening, all nonetheless are an opportunity to reflect on the difficult. It is easy to respond quickly to threats of government intervention, intrusion. It is uncomplicated to reject corporate intrusions into the humanities, for example. Yet, defending intellectual and academic vitality has to be about more than flexing the muscles we have already had many decades experience in flexing, even if we disagree amongst ourselves. It is about the necessity of reflecting on the difficult, like what Rhodes Must Fall or the RU reference list and other movements internally located probe about freedoms in our universities and unfreedoms in our universities. Reflecting on the difficult, the late, great Edward Said's more deliberate process of reflection, research, and inquiring argument is the more urgent task. What does academic freedom have to say about ways of contesting power variously, internally? What is the permissible under academic freedom? What is our responsibility as proponents of academic freedom when we are confronted, surrounded by internal power contestations? The face today of contestation is that of student politics. Student politics are at the heart of national higher education, yet again. Such challenges are to so much that we previously assumed about universities and how they work, movements and how they work, legitimate political contestation, intellectual work, to the collective memorialization of contestation at places like UCT and Wits and Fort Hare and UWC and Rhodes and so on. We would do well to remember that students have always been at the heart of academic freedom debates in this country. Try as we have to rewrite that history. It was students at UCT who started the T.B. Davie lecture. The extensive archival work of people like Ritumetse Ubakeng Mabokela into the histories of contestations at South African and Namibian universities under apartheid show that although we all speak of liberal universities as descriptive of the spirit of the time on campuses UCT, Rhodes, Natal, and Wits, the liberal protesters were a small fragment of staff and students, comparatively. It is a painful reminder about the power we exercise over the past, what we choose to claim as inheritance, even as we may have resisted it. It is a painful reminder about the power we exercise over the past, of the implication of the epistemic project in constructing and claiming legacies. We would do well to remember that although now romantic, the purple shall govern was painful contestation by a significant and minority activist collective comparatively. When the class of 1968 was expelled from Fort Hare, when they refused to see the successful installation of a known Broederbonder, an NP sympathizer, De Wet, as Vice-Chancellor, those students were insisting on academic freedom as a right worth defending at all cost. The cost is well known to some of those students who were expelled, the likes of Dumisa Ntsebeza from that class, the detentions, the tortures, the exiling. Several decades later, in the years 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984, when students on that same campus repeatedly rioted, each time Lennox Sebe, president of the imaginary, but albeit brutal Ciskei state, attempted to enter Fort Hare campus. They were making claims to the freedom of the university space against all odds, as linked to larger freedoms, to other freedoms, to all freedoms. Such histories of students as the bodies that blocked apartheid intrusions on academic space and autonomy are inconvenient often now as we make academic freedom debates the sole terrain of academics. The epistemic independence we claim is implicated in these cycles of erasure and claims to rigorous struggle heritages. Yet, again, students in our midst insist on challenging not just the state and the market, but also performances of power by us. We are obliged to engage questions about the permissible, the faces of contestation, questions of organization, alliances, and many of the foundational, knowledges that hide behind freedom to teach what we like, to whom we like, in the ways that we choose. This is much like how some academics in other parts of the world are preoccupied today as part of their debates on academic freedom, with how alertness around new forms of war and a range of activities that are loosely grouped today under terrorism allow the state to extend the expectation of policing, surveillance, and censure to academics, interfere with our capacity to engage in academic work. Academic freedom has to be about more than freedom over, against, and to. What is the place of freedom from racism and racial harassment in academic freedom? Can we both teach as academics? Can we both teach that buildings matter, that art histories are real, that ways of thinking, of seeing and thinking matter beyond the literal, and that statues are just statues? What do we really mean when we say academic freedom partly means that all ideas must be freely debated? All ideas, as long as we approve of them as ideas. In South Africa, we are not able to proceed as though the challenge of student movements exists as linked to, but still removed from concerns of academic freedom, if we are serious about the latter. This is especially so given the past of students' centrality in academic freedom, and especially so when students also rely on, cite, and reference ideas that hold considerable sway in critical theory traditions within the academy. Academic freedoms challenge the difficult thinking work about both the importance of critical, reflexive rigor in universities and the significant effects of academic disagreement. If we say, after postmodernism, post-colonial theory, deconstruction, critical race, queer and feminist studies, that the grand narratives of truth, the master narratives, have been destabilized, what does it mean for us to insist on single truths again? When we are located in the academy and claim that academic freedom is worth defending? How does that devaluation of intellectual rigor, the devaluation and narrowing of critique, the occlusion of the place of social justice, the criminalization of dissent, impact on academic freedom debates? What are the opportunities afforded to us by these difficult and productive times we live through, to test our ideas and our claimed commitment to academic freedom principles. It is a time for rigor and not a time for safety. We know thinking is risky work. Academic freedom is about testing the limits of this risk and helping clarify for all of us, even if we won't agree, why academic freedom continues to matter. What kind of mattering it is if it remains unaffected by new arising challenges. Are such challenges a threat? Always a threat? Or extensions to definitions of academic freedom and an opportunity for fine-tuning our investment, ensuring that academic freedom continues to matter in dynamic and vibrant ways. The challenge of the contemporary moment is an opportunity to revisit definitions as well. What are the real limits of academic freedom? Why does it matter how we build and rebuild institutions? Why does it matter how we teach? Why does it matter to how we engage in difficult contestation? I think one of the biggest threats to academic freedom today is the triumph of neoliberalism. This is most evident in the ways in which the individual receives primacy in contestation. The ways in which even the contestation is engaged on individual basis. This focus on the individual is staged in telling and dangerous ways. Even in many collectives, there is a stress on fighting as individuals for individual achievement and advancement, rather than a collective structural struggle. This is why I appreciate particularly how the Professors Ramugondo and Professor Pageng spoke about critiquing achievement, recognizing but thinking through what makes the exceptional possible, and not taking the exceptional as a valuable and valid category. To recognize it only in order to be able to undo it as a category. That is not the work of celebrating the individual. This is not to say, of course, that the individual is not also to be celebrated. It is simply to say that there is a structural project which is often occluded when we are pressured to celebrate and to be satisfied with the only, the first. It is very often also the burden of representation, the burden of representativity, the burden of perfection, which again hankers back to those truths that we claim we have undone in the academy, that we are resurfacing and restaging and reviving in many ways. We are often, in the celebration of the individual, often all struggling to reach the top of a system that remains in itself largely unchallenged, celebrating individual achievement and advancement up old hierarchies that always come with old values. It is the old Audre Lorde criticism, yet again. As far as we have come, traces of the past's limitations remain very much with us unless we heed her caution and attempt to unmake the master's house with different tools. Abolish some aspects of the system. Not simply undo and break down, but abolish. And I use abolish specifically, perhaps in ways that are particularly apt in this city. Founded on slavery. This country, whose foundational violence is that of slavery. abolish some aspects of the system rather than focusing only on transfer, trapping us in the failures of the last 2.5 decades since 1994. In an individual transfer only means that, failures of the last 2.5 decades since 1994 in an exclusively aesthetic project that is not also always a structurally altered one. The triumph of neoliberalism is also in the pressure and production, as I've said, of the only and the single, not just only and single individual, but only and single explanation. In the painful aftermath of Professor Bongani Mayosi's suicide, I was dismayed to read some of the responses coming out of Cape Town. First, the report that when he tried to resign because he was depressed, this was not treated with the seriousness we would expect from a leading university with its epistemic resources, the epistemic resources that UCT has at its disposal, but a financial offer. Then the explanations and uses to which the grief of his family were put. This, UCT, is a university with a rich cachet of intellectual and disciplinary resources to make sense of this sad event, to help us understand that depression and suicide cannot be explained in a single source, even if grief needs coherence. Instead, I was taken aback by the clamoring for one explanation as the total explanation, and as it moved through social media and got retweeted and rejigged and remixed. The discursive travels to dismiss and avert intellectual labor and rigor, a refusal of reflexive engagement by some UCT academics who retweeted the explanation of coherence that makes sense of grief as epistemic justification for projects that didn't reference the source of explanation that was now useful in this curious, discursive odyssey. I was taken aback by the clamoring for one explanation as the total explanation, and its discursive travels to dismiss and avert intellectual rigor, a refusal of reflexive engagement with the meaning of the said events, and indeed the meanings and consequences of this event, and yes, the demonization of disagreement and dissent. It seemed strange to me that this approach to a problem, a most unacademic response to a problem by academics from a leading university, the curious discursive odyssey of the single explanation for depression. The triumph of neoliberalism is also present in the corporate management of many problems across the university scape, rather than applying different kinds of resources that exist in the university, in the academy, to understanding causes and emergent problems. UCT's representation of itself has long been implicated in this. It is my alma mater, so I pay more focused attention to its paradoxes. And many of these seem to me implicated in many, many missed opportunities to make use of what we defend in academic freedom. Why does academic freedom not include freedom from harassment, racism, from determination by capitalism? What is the intellectually principled thing to do? What is the ideal place of argument when we are not an academy that resorts to punishing critical engagements by students? How far have we traveled from the Mamdani affair? Now that we've invited him, you'll note I'm suddenly we, even though I'm not even at UCT. Now that we have invited him to give the T.B. Davie lecture, given him an honorary professorship? Have we fully risen to his challenge? Or have we bought ourselves an alibi? A pause. Recourse to the single, to the exceptional, to the special, to the visible that Njabula Ndebele, to the visible, to the spectacular that Njabula Ndebele has so vehemently written and taught us against for over 4 decades. How far have we traveled since the Mafeje affair? So we name a building after him, but don't hire him. A very UCT thing to do. Who is Mafeje's equivalent? Or heir? And when I say heir, of course I mean heiress. I don't like the S stuff. Who is Mafeje today? And has how we engage as the academy, as UCT, with Mafeje today changed at all? For how we have conversations about academic freedom, for what we think about the work of the academy, what universities should be for? Or is it enough that we have named a building after him? Sticking with the business of naming buildings, we also have named a building after Biko. But don't take on board the ideas and principles for which he stood. UCT can call a building after this man as a symbol of something, but is unable to stomach students choosing to eat alone in ways that make sense when we seriously engage with Biko's activism and intellectual legacy. So many years after the painful responses, violent responses to Mamphela Ramphele's sexual harassment policy when I was a student at UCT, the misogyny, the violence, the threat, an engineering lecturer posts what we've all seen, what I will not repeat, on Facebook. How far have we moved? Does any of this have to do with academic freedom? How can it not? What is the place in academic freedom of freedom from harassment, from sexual terrorization? And this in a context where my understanding is that students had raised concern and alarm prior to the post. Now, UCT, of course, prides itself on being a leading university, an intellectually leading university, an epistemically leading university, a prestigious university. I'm not going to mock that claim. This is partly why I applied to UCT. So clearly, I also saw UCT clearly, and I stayed, despite, because of. It's why I came here. It is part that leadership, in interesting and wounding ways, has shaped me, and it is leadership that I remain ambivalent about. But how can we make better use of that position? And certainly UCT historically has leadership in terms of the inheritance we have on academic freedom. T.B. Davie started something, that's followed, someone else followed officially. What is the leadership? We have a leadership opportunity in the context of what Fatima El-Tayeb calls a strange temporality, where those who imagine themselves as the automatic custodians of academic freedom imagine that any contestation directed at their specific position is at once an attack on academic freedom principles in total, and something which belongs outside of academic freedom debates. So we, custodians of academic freedom, the professorate, can launch critiques of academic freedom, but contestations which target us, which engage us in difficult and discomforting ways, have to be foreign to academic freedom. In other words, in this world characterized by El-Tayeb, strange temporality, it is both possible to hold on to precepts and principles of academic freedom and be dismissive of the challenge to the epistemic traditions within which we belong. On the other hand, what kind of engagement with critique does academic freedom really invite, or indeed, in our times, demand? Is it possible to continue to pretend that history has no impact on the core of academic freedom and the university's internal structures? Is it possible to continue to avoid reflecting on the historical knowledge that, again, it is UCT students who started the T.B. Davie lecture? As we continue to embrace the lecture itself, but pretend student concerns are irrelevant to discussions of academic freedom, and to do so at UCT. It is important to note that faced with the challenge of recent student movements, UCT, that I'm always hard on, has gone considerable distance to interrogate how to deal with this difficult moment. The errors have been costly, but there has also been immense demonstrable commitment to experiment, to question, to change minds, to change your minds, to engage in difficult thinking. This has existed in the same space as ongoing amnesia about the foundational epistemic violence of the academy, supported by its downplaying and denial of symbolic violence. Often this type of engagement externalizes the problem of academic freedom, thereby making it that which exists outside the domain of what needs to be theorized. This refusal to see difference and the implication of racial, gendered, sexualized, embodied difference, and its reproduction in the very site of its initial theoretical, scientific, and discursive production and legitimation. Those of us who are scholars of the history of race know that it is the academy that legitimized and popularized race as a category. In a range of disciplines, from English literature, the discipline in which I was trained, to anthropology, to what later became known as race, to psychiatry, to what later became known as race science. And so, while we hold on to the values of academic freedom, it is possible to still, in this denial of this past, it is possible to still criminalize and otherwise surrender some dissenters, some critique of the academic project to the brutal state machinery we otherwise stand opposed to, as a way to make unspeakable the processes of internal racialization in the university and the ways in which they are inseparable from the after effects of European colonialism. In this way, university structures increasingly posit racialized communities as disposable populations, and the problem as new and a simple one. In T.B. Davie's time, academic freedom was not unmoored from the responsibility for work of the imagination, the intellect, to intervene into the urgent questions of what mattered and what not, to dissent even in the face of extreme cost, to provide an opportunity of intellectual leadership. Why then, those of us who claim to function in this tradition, why this hankering after such tired binaries that we build careers debunking? Academic freedom debates, academic freedom principles, academic freedom in total cannot shy away from the challenges to its limits, challenges that we live in the midst of. And I use challenge here not in the narrow, new South African way, which means a difficult thing that we'll talk about but won't address. Right? And the government speak that says we cannot use the word problem. So you have to say, we have challenges, and you don't address the challenges, and you talk about the challenges ad nauseum. I use challenges in the old-fashioned sense of an invitation, a direct invitation to possibility, to experimentation, to risk, to meeting the invitation in interesting and perhaps unpredictable ways. Academic freedom cannot shy away from the challenges to its limits that we live with, to the urgent quest for intellectual rigor, away from the single, the exceptional as enough, away from simply the naming of buildings as substitute for, rather than as part of a structural unmaking and abolishing, to the reflexive exercise on our own work and the attacks on the principles of academic freedom from within our own ranks.
She's very surprised. Thank you. Thank you, Pumla. Thank you, Prof. Gqola, for centering students in the pursuit for academic freedom. I think it was necessary. I got my answers for now. As for the audience, to pose questions, and I see already a hand. Can we take 3 hands at a time? I've noted 1 hand. Bavil. All right. I'll give an opportunity to my brother here, and if you have questions, please don't be.
My name is Nkosi Khulule Nyembezi, and thank you very much for an inspiring lecture, and a lot of insight came up. So the question that I have is, like, what do you think should be done to mediate the various challenges that stand on the way of academic freedom at a macro level now? Because what happens in the university is also a reflection of the society at large. I'm asking in this in the context of the coming national and provincial elections in 2019. Because there's also this scenario that says the academic space and space for academics to exercise academic freedom is an isolated one. If you look at the community surveys by States SA 2016 and those published thereafter, in the 20 priorities of the country, education and human development that we took from the RDP is number 15. Topping the list is, the 3 of them is water, access to electricity, and then the employment. So the point is this: if now we have also the opportunity next year for political parties to renew the mandate and to set the national agenda, that in a way that is going to affect academic freedom, how can we imagine things differently in order to mobilize in that space? Thank you.
That's a very difficult question. Is that the only question? I'm still formulating a response. I guess you don't come to UCT for easy questions.
I actually have 2 questions to the audience. One is, How many students are present? Okay, roughly half. And another thing I'm really curious about is which faculties people are connected to. I won't claim I know all the faculties by name, by heart. Would you mind taking a poll, or can't we do that? Okay, let's start with health sciences. Okay, humanities. I need some help. Arts? Is that a faculty? Science? Engineering and the built environment? That one I know. So which faculty? Law? Okay, which one did we skip?
Commerce.
Sorry? Commerce. Any others we missed? Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, I think you got your answers, right? Okay, there's a question here.
My name is Pumla Dineo Gqola. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful, and I think it articulated a lot of things that we as students had been thinking for a while. My question is related to the impact or the role that we can play trying to enter these academic spaces and change them from the inside. Just in terms of how can these spaces firstly be made more accessible for the Black student and for other students of color? Because it seems as though you have to find yourself at a specific place at a specific time with specific people before you even know that these spaces exist. Furthermore, when you brought up representation, I thought that that was very vital, as it's a double-edged sword, because it does benefit some, but not everyone, and you can't really say that the benefit is consequential if one person is supposed to be a model student for the rest of us. So then how can we switch the narrative from representation to meaningful impact that will outlive those of us who want to enter those spaces?
Oh, we're going to have, is this going to be the only round? So we can take the other two.
Hi, Prof. Thank you very much for an amazing presentation, your lecture. My question is very simple. I mean, being at a place like UCT, in a moment like this, how do we protect one another from white woman arrogance? How do we protect one another from the arrogance of whiteness and white womanness from taking up space from important lectures during an important time and important conversations that we need to have collectively as a university? Thanks.
We'll take one last question for this round, and I've noted the 2 hands. After she's answered those questions, then we can take those 2 questions.
Well, hi, Prof. Gqola. Yeah. I always come to these conversations and lectures, of course, expecting to gain more and learn more. And of course, there's one personal expectation I always get. And I always have that expectation because of what, of course, I hear from these conversations and what I assume I will hear. And luckily for me, I assumed very well. You spoke about the exceptionalism of such spaces as UCT specifically, and you spoke about representation. And in those 2 things, I always expect There's no way, of course, we could speak about legitimizing other ways of knowing, but yet we always leave behind language. I always find that there is no space for language, particularly in a context of a country such as South Africa that is really diverse and has the past that it has. And many other ways of knowing are very much closely embedded in our languages. Then my question is, how do you always speak about other ways and legitimizing those ways of knowing, yet you are going to leave behind our languages? So that's my interest, really.
So those very difficult questions, Prof.
They're great questions. The first one is still the hardest. So I'll answer it somewhere in the middle because I don't really know what the answer is. I'm going to start with the last question because it's the freshest in my mind. I think that yes and no. I think that we need a real, not just superficial. So I'm not saying you're superficial. I'm saying I'm not responding in the kind of a superficial. I'm trying not to respond in superficial. I think we need to have a real, serious interrogation of what we mean by our languages. I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but I also disagree with what you're saying at the same time, right? So, what does it mean to say that, yes, of course, Sepedi is my language? Who's saying, okay, why can't it be my language? Huh? So, I mean, what you're saying is very valid, right? You're talking about the thing that all of us who are polyglots understand about how language works, right? About the anxiety and the failure, the constant flirtation with failure and productivity, the wonderful flirtation with danger, the battle with language, as Grace Nichols would say, that inheres in occupying multiple languages at the same time. I think, though, so I hear what you're saying about being able to have these conversations in multiple languages. I would say, though, that we have these conversations in multiple languages. And that even but multiple languages is not simply the difference between Sepedi, Setswana, Xitsonga, Swahili, and English. It is also, I mean, English, to what extent is, and I don't subscribe to necessarily Achebe's position that English can be made to carry the weight of every African experience. But English is the language in which Arundhati Roy speaks to me. It is the language in which I receive Audre Lorde. And so, what does it mean to say it is the language of my disciplinary training? Right? Even as I'm also always invested in the unmaking of that discipline. Right? So we're talking about decoloniality and we're talking about post-coloniality, and English literature is more than just language. English colonialism is impossible without English literature. What does it mean for me to disengage completely from that project and claim a decolonial or post-colonial politics? And so the battle is always with language. I'm not entirely sure that simply changing the literal language of these conversations really is all the work that we need to do, even as we must also do that work, right? But I don't think that's the work of translation. That's the work of thinking how to do that work differently, right? But the really hard work of thinking how to do that differently, beyond, so I don't know what the answer is, but it is an absolutely important challenge in the useful sense, not in the government sense of challenge, in the sense that I like, not in the shutting down, pretending to engage sense. I mean, I think that's an important question. I think it's a crucial challenge. And I think you're right, the project of decoloniality cannot really be serious outside of answering what that answer might be. But I think it's, and I think it's important not to reach for the easy answer, right? Which is not what you're saying, which is, in fact, your invitation is couldn't be further from reaching to the easy answers. And I think in terms of the representation and exceptionalism, I agree. So that part I don't have anything to add to. How do we protect, where is she?
You can't miss her.
I don't know. We asked the question that you asked as we ask an important question as response to a very bizarre invitation and poll.
How do we protect other Black women in the future?
How do we protect other Black women in the future? We protect ourselves. We protect each other. We ask the difficult question. We speak from rage and irritation. We interrupt the arrogance. And hopefully in that repeated experimental attempt to protect and to create something that might be protection, that might work, we create the thing that we have not yet imagined, but that we know we need.
Okay.
Marcia, that's the best. That's a really inadequate response, but I don't know. I want to know too.
The difficult question.
The difficult question.
Do you want to think some more, and then we take the last two questions?
Another question.
Yeah, we have two questions, but you ready?
Questions outstanding.
Okay.
I'm going to attempt the difficult question sideways because I really don't know. And generally, when I don't know how to, when I really don't know what I think the answer is, I hide behind my discipline and I pretend I'm coming at the question creatively. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm in fact even going to sit sideways so I can perform what I feel very.
You're running for disciplinary cover. You're using disciplinary cover.
Okay. No, I'm answering, but I'm answering sideways. So I'm going to give an answer. It will probably not answer what he asked me, but it'll be an answer.
Nyembezi, you ready?
What should be done? I think that. I think two things. I mean, for me, several things came out in what you were saying. And some of those things are about the place of academic work in our societies beyond, right? In actually doing work that matters. We're always doing work that matters. All work matters, right? But work that matters in ways that are visible to not just those of us in the academy. So how do we determine the prioritization, that the prioritization is different? Perhaps by doing that thing that we often trained not to do in the academy, by disrespecting the boundaries of what academic work is, what intellectual work is. At the same time as I say this, I am not as optimistic and as confident in political parties' promises and priority lists as I once was, as I really want to be. And so I think that we pay attention to what that listing as number 15 means. And I think we pay attention to how people think that number 15 has nothing to do with water. And perhaps we make obvious, not just in the academic papers, which I love, by the way. I'm always kind of seen as the academic who doesn't like academic papers, which always puzzles me. Only because it's not true. Obviously, I'm a professor, so I like academic articles too. And so I think that we do so by less apologetically making those connections, and by undoing those lists, and by doing intellectual work against those lists, not just in conversations with each other, but in the ways in which, because I mean we do it. The fact that you know those lists is not just because you're a researcher. It's also because you're a person who's a researcher who also lives in this thing that we call a country, right? In this thing that we call, the world outside the academy. And so I think that we we influence the prioritization, the reprioritization by getting involved in those larger debates in untidy and unpredictable ways, and by using the incredible resources we have as academics, even though they're not resources that as many resources as we would like to have, by probing those connections. So that's not an answer, but you know what's going to happen? In 2 weeks, I'm going to have a better answer, and then I'm not going to know where to find you, and nobody else will. So I'll email you the answer, and then nobody else will get the answer. And then the question about the impact and role we can play, you asked me a lot of questions. Thank you very much. How do we make, I don't know. I suppose it depends also on who the we is, right? So the question around, I don't know. I suppose part of what I was trying to think through, part of what I was trying to grapple, is whether, in fact, there is a real way in which, for as long as we're trying to think about working within the system and having more and more and more and more of us within the system completely unchanged, whether, in fact, we are ever going to be able to make those more accessible, or if it's just going to be a different us from the current us, which doesn't, and I'm not sure what I mean by this, because I obviously, I derive enormous pleasure from the life I've chosen in the academy, right? So even when I say, yes, but we need to unbake the academy and we need to abolish the hierarchy, I mean we need to abolish the hierarchy. But I don't want an academy that isn't an academy. I just don't want this academy. But I don't, so I'm not sure. So it seems to me that the question of how do we make things more accessible is precisely why we're still here, right? Because, and I mean, I come from that generation, I was born in 1972, so I come from a generation that had to deal constantly with people saying, do you work inside the system and change the things, or do you work outside the system? And it went on and on and on, and of course it's an irresolvable. And when you're in student politics, you're like, no, you can't work inside the system. And then, but you want to be a professor, now you're a professor, you're like, I don't know, you can't work inside the system, but I have to work in the system. But you can't leave the system unchanged once you're inside the system, right? So then it becomes, so it's a shifting, it's a constantly mutating question. It's not a question that ever goes away, right? But I'm not convinced that I am completely disillusioned. I come from the generation of grow your own timber, which even as a graduate student at UCT, I thought was a particularly horrible metaphor. As we kept saying, a few of my colleagues and I, but you grow your timber to cut it down. Why would this be the metaphor of how to grow the post-apartheid black academic class? Growing your own timber, so you can cut it down and make what from it? Something else, which of course has happened, right? So I think that I think trying to make things more accessible isn't quite. I think what we need is part of what's happening now, the rethinking of what we want in its place, and the experimentation with trying to abolish and remake and fall and so on. Then representation to impact. Well, I mean, I think that I think it's that old feminist debate that feminist political scientists on this continent and in South Asia have talked about, representativity, rather like representation in the political science sense, not in the Stuart Hall sense, right? I don't think that we can surrender representation. Of course, you need more of us, right? So the numbers are always going to matter, right? But I think that we also need to disabuse ourselves of this romantic, and I say this from a very pained place, because I like the romance of more women mean that the world is going to be better run. More black people means that things are going to be, but I also am old enough to know that the romance and right? But at the same time, I don't think that we then completely withdraw from the importance of representation. I think representativity, however, is a perpetual con right? I think that is just a way to make someone who's already, there aren't really benefits from being the exceptional, the only, I mean, it's nice to do what you want going to do, but I think it's a perpetual site of violence, right? Because you become special and you become exceptional even as you are actually evidence. The fact that there's only one or two or three is evidence of how disastrous and how in need of abolishment the system is, right? But of course, in order to not abolish and to provide an alibi and to avoid abolishing, we focus on the celebration of the exceptional and we say, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, as though this is a thing that's possible in a capitalist world.
Resonance, right? Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I've noted the fourth hand, but I'm not gonna take the fourth hand, Siwe. There are 3 hands that I've noted. So she's been waiting for a long time. There's 2 others. Where was you? Were the second, and then at the back. So Siwe, you're gonna have to just continue afterwards. And when I walk towards you, start wrapping up, okay? When you, all right, okay. Yeah. Where was the, yeah.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Zukiswa Jiki.
I know
And yes,
you,
yes. So my question is probably more directed to the university than you. And it's based on the concept of academic freedom as was defined by Prof. Pakeng. Well, the definition provided by Prof. Pakeng through Professor T.B. Davie, that academic merit is the main characteristic for academic freedom. And my question is, where do we begin to draw or measure and say this is where academic freedom begins without interrogating previous circumstances for different people like minorities? How do we begin to say that this is what academic merit is, this is what the standard is, without taking into account how different minority people, black people, queer people have been affected previously, poor people have been affected previously by their circumstances? How do we put 2 students from completely different backgrounds and say, write a test, the white student gets 80, the black student gets 60, that's the mark, she worked hard, you didn't? I mean, what kind of legacy, what's the direction that the legacy of Prof. T.B. Davie should be taking in terms of factoring transformation and in terms of thinking that if academic freedom is going to be fair, actually, and just? Thank you.
Hi. I'm Gertrude Feston. I'm the Center of African Studies, and I'm here fairly new. Yes, I know you know who I am. But I think I want to really thank you for your last few sentences about that. We actually need to self-reflect. What are we doing? How are we doing? And I mean, I think also taking very seriously, having more evaluation by our students of our work, so that we actually see that we can have that feedback. But I'm going to cut a bit shorter because of time. But I'm fairly new, so maybe I've missed out. But you've mentioned the buildings now, that you've. But I've only seen Sissy Gould Plaza and the Molly Blackburn Little Hall, and I've just discovered now a Bessie Head computer room. No buildings. And I think that we in terms of our past, and I think we must also be very critical, because I know that, yes, the Steve Biko building, but what the writings, but also look at the patriarchy in some of these movements. And I must say that I find it particularly challenging when I'm often at many Pan-African meetings. I'm always, there's the whole thing that, no, patriarchy came with colonialism. And and I really think we need to explore how do we debunk that myth, and also here at UCT. Thanks, though. I'll stop you there.
Thank you, Prof. Quickly, Prof, I think my question would be just, oh, sorry, here at the back, behind. Yeah, I think my question would be, of course, the concept of academic freedom as a, as an egalitarian idea, it goes, it flows well. And I think my question would be first, when we say academic freedom, we're saying freedom from what? And then the next thing would then be understanding particularly the context of previously white institutions like UCT, predominantly white institutions like UCT, that have even had prevalent white ideas, from what you're studying in economics, in engineering, and so forth and so on, in a country where the majority of the country is in actual fact the minority within the institution. What becomes the protection of the prevalent ideas in that institution? Like, what does that mean when we speak of academic freedom? Perhaps we're saying, is it something that we may need to pause and then we come back to it once we've been able to create the egalitarian society? Are we saying we are going to use this thing as a machine to try and improve? But then how would we do that, understanding what I've said before? Thanks, Prof.
Okay, very quickly. Well, I mean, what is academic freedom? From what? From all the things that I said and some others that I can't think of yet that are necessary, from state intrusion, from harassment, and I think what I was trying, we often think about academic freedom very narrowly because it comes from, and we think about the state, and we think about very specific market intrusions. But I mean, I think that we have plenty of evidence in our context, and in the East African context specifically, maybe many other places, but those are the academies that I've studied closest, that academic freedom, of course, has to take seriously the things that it says it is about, the serious contestation, and those epistemic traditions that you're talking about, ways of knowledge, what counts as knowledge. No, I don't think it's something that we can park, because I don't think freedom is something that you can postpone dealing with, right? So for me, academic freedom is as unpostponable and as urgent and as in urgent need of constant interrogation as any freedom is, right? I don't think you can kind of, well, this part of the free, to me that sounds too much like, well, okay, let's be free as middle-class blacks, but we're going to see about the class issue within blackness, right, or within Africanness, or within, and so on. So I think academic freedom from what? Historically, it's from intrusion into the academy, right? That's been the easier thing that we've all been able to unite behind, intrusion by outsiders. But actually, part of what we always claim is we, the different we's, claim is also freedom to contest, to take seriously the work of interrogation and disagreeing and engagement, which is why it's so troubling and completely unacceptable to me that we, in 2018, 2015, 2016, 2017, have rejigged academic freedom to be about a tiny, tiny part of what academic freedom is, whereas we come in a country and we exist in academies that have been deeply shaped by a much more vibrant interrogation of what academic freedom that we are still living in the midst of. But now, of course, what we do is we parcel off certain sections of the contestation that happens on campuses. And so for me, you cannot talk about academic freedom without talking about sexual harassment on campuses. You cannot talk about academic freedom without talking about freedom from the criminalization of four lists. You cannot talk about incursions on the state at the same time you're colluding with the state to put student activists in jail. That is part of academic freedom. So it can't be freedom from only the people that we all don't like, but it's free of some of the difficult work. So I think it's a program that kind of needs to be perpetually expanded rather than one that needs to be. And I think it's fascinating that you say UCT is a previously white university, because I'm teasing you only slightly. I'm done, almost just one sentence. Because, of course, it isn't a previously white university. It's not a previously white university, it's a white university. What does it mean to be a white university? To be a white university does not mean to be a university that is majority white. It is a university where the prevailing, taken for granted logic and traditions are white. It is a tradition that takes white for granted. So it can be peopled by people who are all sorts of things, and it can have a majority black, and interestingly, like many South African universities, majority black student population. But then okay. Zukiswa. No, I think that what Professor she can speak very eloquently for herself. So I'm not going to speak for her or in her defense. I'm just going to say what I... So Professor Pakeng, I think what she was saying about meritocracy, I mean, she wasn't talking about, I think she was talking about merit and the place of, because I mean, one of the founding notions in the TB Davie kind of strand of academic freedom in the South African one is this idea that we will not use this either criteria that you give us, we will use criteria that we determine. And it's interesting because UCT has a very, very complicated relationship with measuring merit, right? UCT, with all of its nonsense, to be honest, is also, and with all of its violence and all of its investment in meritocracy, which interestingly comes from a certain colonial tradition, and I mean, you know, the scholarship on meritocracy has completely debunked the discourse of meritocracy that we circulate in this academy. But interestingly, part of UCT's engagement, part of UCT's historic engagement, which is now in the process of completely undoing, is in fact an interrogation of what measurements and what tests and what meritocracy meant. So for example, in the early 90s, right, in the late 80s and the early 90s, one of the things that UCT did that no other universities did was that they developed these tests for entrance, so people kind of applying to get into UCT, that in fact recognized that the matric examination system was not a reliable indicator. And so if you pass the UCT entrance test, and we can critique that, but if you pass the UCT entrance test, you got admission based on that, not based on the grade that you got for matric, because they recognize that merit, that the one did not indicate. So that kind of critical, so it's messy. The thing about merit is messy, but I think it matters for academic freedom, because part of what I think that argument is saying that academic communities need to determine that, not the state, not other people, that these communities need to determine what value looks like, what those principles are. And it's not like we arrive at whatever is an interesting engagement with merit and then we've arrived. It is an ongoing, endless, you know, processual investment. Gertrude. Wait, but
That's fine.
I'm going to answer Gertrude now. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you people can do what you want.
I get what you said. It's your stage.
After I answer
Your
Gertrude.
stage.
Gertrude,
So you'll come after.
Look, I don't even know. I just hear that there are all these buildings named these things. In fact, I heard about the bigger one 2 hours before this, so I inserted it. It wasn't even in the thing, so I just inserted it 2 hours ago because a friend of mine who I was at UCT with for all 3 degrees that I got from UCT said to me, and you know now they've named it the bigger building, but the food thing. So yes, I mean, I think it's absolutely, I think you're right. I mean, you know, we do need to interrogate how we name buildings. And also this obsession in South Africa with naming buildings and big, ugly things after people that we admire. Like I'm not entirely opposed to it, but I do think that, I don't know, you know, Yvette Abrahams made this argument when people were saying, no, let's name the Cape Town airport. People were fighting. Should we name it one black woman or another black woman? Should we name it the Winnie Mandela? Not that we're really going to name it either one. Or Sarah Baartman. And she said, why would you want, or Krotoa? And she said, why would you even want to name a toxic environmental hazard that's nasty, that's hideous, that's horrible, that's like killing the earth and think you're honoring the people that you name it after, right? But of course, that makes sense if you speak a different language. If you also speak a different language. The language that the academy wants us all to take for granted if we are to be the properly educated colonial subjects, and we all fail and refuse, not all. But some of us, obviously, that didn't work. That project doesn't work. It continues to fail. But if it didn't fail, then we would also recognize that that is only celebration. It is not always. But at the same time, we have to mark space, right? I don't want to live in a building that's called Verwoerd. building, right? And I used to live on Fort Trekker Street once, and I mean, seriously. So, but I think you absolutely, I mean, in terms of kind of interrogating what we name and why we name, and whether actually that's the best way to reconfigure space, right? How do we critically engage with that tradition of claiming space? Is that the only way you claim space, by naming it in those kinds of ways? And also, what are we visibilizing? And I think in terms of patriarchy came with colonialism, you know, I don't even think that people who claim it believe it, to be honest. I don't think anybody really believes it. I think that they're doing what Morrison says white supremacy does. It wears us out. Now we're going to go and not do what we want to do as feminists in the world. We're going to now spend all our time trying to find evidence of patriarchy, and then we're still sitting with this patriarchy, but now we're proving. Look, in 1300s, here were the African patriarchs, see? And frankly, I don't even think they believe it, but they know it works. So I don't think that people who want to do that work should not do it, but me, I'm not doing that work. It's too exhausting. I want to do the other work.
I think it's a pause, and Prof. Bakeng, I mean, we're in the same, committee. All right.
The challenge is to the university, okay? And I'm going to start by saying meritocracy is a problem in general. It's not a problem of UCT. Just like excellence, we talk about excellence, is very controversial. And there are contexts where, when you are not here at UCT and you are elsewhere, that your seen as excellence and your excellence actually can be problematized, because there are people who didn't have your privilege, who are not able to achieve what you have achieved. Because in fact, you're coming here, actually, you came into UCT because of the you met the criteria for this meritocracy. So we've got to, as we do this, I think we should critique ourselves as well, because we're playing into it. Okay? And because you're here, you're saying, well, it's not benefiting me, so I want to fight it. What do you do when it benefits you? Because it has. That's why you're here. Okay? And I'm going to leave that as a challenge, that it's a broader discussion and debate of what do we mean by excellence and what does merit do. Of course, T.B. Davie, that quote was from T.B. Davie, and he was challenging using race as a criterion. And he was saying, well, instead of using race, we're going to use merit, okay? And I've been talking about my vision, and I have these 3 pillars, and I always start with excellence, and my first sentence is excellence is controversial. In fact, if you Google, you go to the research office website, you'll find the first speech that I made when I got into this university, and I believe 100% in that. Excellence is problematic. Excellence is controversial. Excellence, as much as we pursue it, it's problematic because it marginalizes, it can silence, it invisibilizes, it can do a whole lot of damage. And we know, we can see, we live in a space where it does that. So meritocracy does that. And I'm saying, as we pursue excellence, we've got to critique it, and then we've got to say, but what do we mean? Why does it look the way it looks now? Why does it create a possibility, a situation where black students' performance is always lower, even if they pass it low? Why does it create a situation when we call up excellence, white men stand up more than other people? And it has been enabled by our past, the apartheid past. It has been enabled to come out the way it is. But it's not only here. I mean, I think it manifests itself in different ways. So there's nothing that says we are saying it's unproblematic, it's benign, and you just have to take it as it is. But there's no way we can say, we're just going to give you a 70 simply because of this. So we've got to say, how do you create a situation where a student who's accepted here is enabled to perform, I'm intimidated, is enabled to also have an opportunity to get the 70, how do we recognize different kinds of excellence, and how do we create opportunities in such a way that, but we can't just do away with it. Otherwise, we also have to, we've got to recognize it happens in many spaces, and in many ways we are privileged and we are beneficiaries of the meritocracy that we're critiquing, actually.
Thank you. So there are many messages to take home with us, and there's lots of things that I can thank you for, but definitely the one about students being at the center, I think that's a gift for us, the center in pursuing academic freedom. I think you've also said something that has been encouraging for many of us, the experimentation that we started, that it is work worth fighting for, right? So as we're talking about excellence and valuing different ways of knowing, I hope you have started reading the curriculum change framework, because some of that conversation is there and it needs to be continued. Thank you, Prof. Gqola.